So, hello and welcome everybody to another Sacred Wisdom podcast. In this podcast today, we are going to talk about the Arctic homeland. And this is in reference to Hyperborea and all the stories that have come from that land. And the North Pole is a very fascinating place once you start looking into it. I found out a really interesting fact about the Arctic, and that is there is an actual Arctic Council, which we don't hear much about these days. So I am joined with the amazing Stephen Denman today to talk about this subject in depth with all his knowledge to bring it to the table and articulate it so well. So how are you, Stephen?
I'm doing extremely well. And how are you going, Zach? All good?
Very good, my brother. Very good.
Mhm.
And looking forward to today and what you've looked into. So tell us more. So let's start with this kind of stories surrounding the Greeks and the philosophers and how they talked about Hyperborea and this land, ancient land that was in the North Pole once upon a time.
So we know most of what individuals who've done any research into the purported civilization of Hyperborea, the landmass of Hyperborea, is really stories that have come from Greek mythology and Greek folklore. Most individuals wouldn't have researched the various stories from, Sami or Laplander folklore. They certainly wouldn't have looked into the various stories from Turkic mythology and Turkic folklore in Central Asia and southern Russia. So a lot of people just focused and tend to stay focused on the stories that have come from Greek mythology and Greek folklore in regards to Hyperborea. What we know, just taking it from the starting point of those stories, is that from what we know in Greek mythology and Greek folklore, there was apparently a landmass with an eternal spring, with a very balmy, very beautiful, temperate climate that existed beyond the Rhipaean Mountains or the Riphaean Mountains. Now, the Rhipaean Mountains or the Riphaean Mountains in the Greek language, that word means gusty. So we're talking about the gusty mountains. In other words, high turbulent airflows in the upward altitudes of the Rhipaean Mountains or the Riphaean Mountains. And we know from further researches that have been done that these Rhipaean Mountains or Riphaean Mountains are now known today as the Polar Urals and the Northern Urals of north central Russia. And we know that there was, according to Greek mythology and Greek folklore, there was a vast pinnacle known as the Lefka Buanu, which means White Mountain. Obviously, that's in the Greek language. And we also know that this was connected to what they defined as the Borea Charavgi, which is the North Dawn. More commonly in the Latin language, it's known as the Aurora Borealis or the North Dawn. So there was an interaction and interplay of words and phrases in Greek mythology and Greek folklore, connecting the ether or the atmosphere above the polar Urals and the northern Urals of the Yamal-Nenets Autonomous Okrug of north central Russia, which they knew in Greek mythology and Greek folklore as the Rhipaean Mountains or the Riphaean Mountains. Now, obviously, the landmass of Hyperborea was supposedly in existence beyond the Rhipaean Mountains or the Riphaean Mountains, the Polar Urals or the Northern Urals of north central Russia, which therefore takes us into the Arctic Circle and therefore the Arctic North Polar region.
Sorry, the word Arctic actually derived from the Greek, doesn't it? So it
Yes, it's
actually
from the Greek. It comes from the Greek word arctos. It's to do with the bear. So, like you can think
right.
of the European brown bear, the polar bear. So, in a way, it's very apt, obviously, and obviously the Antarctic Antarctos is means against the bear. That's what it means. It
Right. Okay.
technically translated from the Hellenica glossa or the Greek language. That's what it effectively means.
And
It's
what sort of date are we looking at? I know we've
Okay, so the civilization and the landmass of Hyperborea was purported to have existed up until around sometime in the Upper Paleolithic. So we're going back well over 50,000 years
wow.
BC. But again, this has come from documents and researches that have been done into Hyperborea. Again, this completely conflicts and contradicts what we've been told in Western science. I'm sure people will say it's information from Shields, disinformation, just as they'll say that what connections are there between Great Tataria in northern Russia and Hyperborea and the Arctic North Polar region. So you've got all this conjecture and people who just try and shut down any lines of inquiry and, shall we say, academic investigation on an objective level into the information. So we know that legends, whether it's in Greek mythology and Greek folklore, come from stories that come from a narrative that has come from one or more events, usually quite traumatic or epic in essence or resonance, that have imprinted on the minds of populations profound ideas and concepts that they've relayed that have become slightly morphed over the centuries and aeons of time.
Do you
So
think? Do you think the eternal spring that's spoken about? Do you think that is in relation to the Bible, connected to the Garden of Eden? That kind of concept.
Hyperborea is, in terms of it being an archetypal symbol, could be seen as literally a Garden of Eden, within the Arctic North Polar region. We have to remember what happened when Rear Admiral Richard Evelyn Byrd actually flew over the Arctic continent,
Well,
and
there's
he described,
Olaf Janssen as well. I mean, that
yeah,
story parallels with the spring. Sorry, Steve, Admiral Byrd. Yeah.
yeah, he obviously described a highly fertile expanse where there shouldn't have been. It should have been glacial sheeting. It should have been ice-bound with snow dunes, completely indistinguishable apart from small brownish rocky outcrops piercing through the veil of all that snow and ice. And what he
Mm.
saw was trees and shrubs. He
Yeah.
saw various types of, wildlife. What we now believe to be at least one woolly mammoth was seen there, plus other life forms that don't technically exist.
Mm.
And again, this conflicts with Western science. So again, we have to question, what are we actually being given as information here? Are we being given truthful, authentic information? Are we being given distortions and concealed, reformatted information to cover up those concealed truths?
Well, they've definitely found mammoths in the frozen in the ice, and they've actually taken the DNA of their mammoths, and they're actually, apparently, this is what I've heard, they're actually recreating these animals.
Well,
So some,
that's been talked about for well over 30, 35 plus years, if not more, coming out of the Russian Federation.
mm,
It's believed that the remains have been found, obviously, in the Kamchatka Peninsula, the Russian Far East, Siberia, which is in northeastern Russia, and obviously the Siberian taiga forests. There's been many accounts, even going back into Slavic mythology and Slavic folklore from Eastern Russia, of sightings by various Turkic tribes, Slavic Caucasians, who have seen these woolly mammoths in the Siberian taiga forests in the remotest and most inaccessible areas.
and we
Again, how
always
true that is open to debate, but
and we always get this impression that the North Pole is icy, cold, and obviously it is in certain parts of the year, but it also does get very warm in certain parts of the
yes,
year
that's
as well.
correct.
Still does,
Yeah.
and makes
So we know that in the faraway north, beyond the Riparian Mountains or these Riphaean Mountains, the Gusty Mountains or the Windy Mountains, there was this vast, almost epic, perhaps even ethereal civilization of Hyperborea.
Mm.
And this was frequented by Nordic Hyperboreans. And in Greek mythology, there is this connection made between Apollo Olympos, he's the solar deity, one of the 12 Olympians, who spends his most of his lifetime living in this Arctic North Polar region within the civilization and landmass of Hyperborea. So
Mm.
you have this archetypal symbol of the solar deity in the land of eternal spring, where there's constant sunlight, and he is seen as this individual who represents perhaps the blessed radiances of the sun that nourishes the trees and the plants and helps to encourage the diversity of the ecosystems in what we've been always told by Western science is this inaccessible, ice-bound, glaciated, snowed over, massive expanse called the Arctic continent. And obviously there's huge numbers of Arctic islands that exist all around the Arctic Circle, just outside the more central area of the Arctic North Polar region. So Again, how much of what we've been given is true, how much is a distortion, again, is open to debate. So I'm trying to be objective by not, just dismissing everything from all the scientific researches that have come out,
Of
since
course. Yeah.
since the modern age began. When it comes to the Arctic continent, we have to consider all options, all ideas, all concepts, and really look at all the information in a very objective, calm, and collective manner. So.
I think it's very interesting that the Santa Claus's North Pole dream home was invented in the 1860s by
Yeah,
Thomas Nast, a political cartoonist.
that's
And I
right.
find that really interesting because, the way that was set up again in the 1850 period,
That's
and
right.
obviously it was maybe in reference to some other civilization that was there,
That's
possibly.
right. Absolutely.
Interesting how Lapland, it was actually Lapland, apparently, Santa Claus originally came from, but then it somehow transferred over to the North Pole, didn't it?
Yeah, it was originally from the Lapland region of Finland.
Mm,
The greater expanse, as you know, is called Fennoscania, which
yeah.
obviously includes the whole of northern Scandinavia, and
Mm,
obviously it expands and goes over into the Kola Peninsula of the Murmanskoblast of actually north western Russia, which is also very interesting. And we know from the stories of Greek mythology and Greek folklore, there was what is known as the Golden River of Hyperborea. This was
wow.
Eridanos. And Eridanos in the Greek language means freshly scorched. Now, this was referring to the riverbanks, and they were seemingly had an orangish or reddish hue to them. And one
Mm,
of the reasons for this was in Greek mythology, which is incredibly abstract, is that alongside both the left and right hand sides of the Eridanus River was literally thousands of these silver poplar trees. Imagine that silver poplar trees
wow.
that had amber droplets that literally fell from them continually, that obviously colored the various soil and gravel on the riverbanks of the Golden River of Hyperborea.
Wow.
Um, and in Greek mythology also, there's these, and Greek folklore, there's these constant references back to the fertility, the ecological vibrancy of the civilization and landmass of Hyperborea, ruled by these profoundly advanced and highly spiritually focused Nordic Hyperboreans beyond the Rhipaean Mountains or the Riphaean Mountains, the gusty mountains, the windy mountains that are now known as the polar Urals and the northern Urals of north central Russia.
Mm.
And they refer to what is in the Greek mythology and the Greek folklore to what is defined as the Apollon Kippos, and that's from the Greek language, meaning the square assembly garden. So now
Right.
we're getting the idea of highly ornate landscape gardens built in grid patterns, this Apollon Kippos square assembly garden,
Mm.
built in the landmass of Hyperborea, no doubt not too far from the Golden River of Hyperborea, Eridanus. So we're seeing again, was that some kind of electromagnetic confluence? Again, I'm just putting it out there as a question that was going on. Were they drawing down telluric electricity by shaping the landscape with certain trees and plants connected to the piezoelectric effect of the Golden River of Hyperborea beyond the Rhipaean Mountains or Riphaean Mountains in the Arctic North Polar region? Perhaps we're discussing here aspects of occult technology that pretty much nobody has any real idea how different from the types of subject matter we're taught today in Western science. So it's difficult for a lot of people to encapsulate such a radically different type of civilization, as we've discussed in so many previous Sacred Wisdom podcasts, when it comes to the civilization of Great Tartaria.
Well, it's in a frequency, and that frequency we haven't discovered yet, and or we're rediscovering. I think that in the ancient civilizations we used this frequency, or we understood what this frequency was.
So the actual Greek deity that's connected with Hyperborea was Borea Olympos.
That's
So
right.
obviously
The,
his name
the North
indicates
Wind.
that he was the wind god. He was
Yeah.
the north wind deity, and he was the individual that had complete rulership, kingship, in terms of literally being divinely ordained over this remote landmass of Hyperborea. And
Do you
it's
think he
interesting
was?
to
Do you think he was a king then?
I think I believe there was a civilization going back into the Upper Paleolithic that we can define today as Hyperborea.
Yeah.
I believe it existed in the Arctic North Polar region. I think there's been vast amounts of sea quakes and earthquakes over the last 3,500 years to maybe 4,200 years or round about. There's been a huge amount of tectonic activity
Mm,
in the Arctic Ocean, in all those different expanses and aquatic environments
mm,
off the coastline of northern Russia. So there's been a lot of changes to the landscapes there. And I believe that there was a lot more landmass there before all
mm.
these changes took place.
You can
And
look at the old ancient maps and you'll see northern Russia. There is
yeah,
a lot more landmass and locations and towns and little cities. Oh, not I don't know about cities, but definitely towns.
that's
Um,
right.
and just to say, the North Pole. Interestingly, it has one of the. I think it's got all like the biggest seed bank of the world is
Yeah.
based in the North Pole. So obviously it's not connected to Hyperborea, but that I find that interesting how that is located there. And obviously, what we're told about the North Pole. Why do you think that is? Just out of interest, why do you think the largest seed bank is located? Because it's out of the way of people? Is that why? Out of
Well, it's
reach?
in the event of some kind of world flood, in the
Yeah,
event of possible thermonuclear conflict. It would be buried and concealed away in a sub-zero, remote, apparently glaciated and iced over, snowy domain, far away from any civilizations. And it would have to be agreed upon to access the seed banks within the international community through probably the United Nations or UN. I think that's why it's placed there, because it's icy, it's very cold, sub-zero
right. Okay.
temperatures. It makes sense to have it in such a remote, almost inaccessible location to most human beings. But
Mm,
coming back to the Greek mythology and the Greek folklore about Hyperborea, we know for aeons of time there was a royal theocracy that was diligently ruled over by what is known in the Greek language as the Arias Basilias Triada, which translates in the English to the priest king trinity.
right.
These were also known as the Trias, Arias, Basilias, which also translates to the three priest kings. So there was a direct connection between the divine rulership through the monarchy
Right.
of Hyperborea and the idea of divine priesthood, obviously in the worship of, the universal creator of heaven and earth. And there is a delineation specifically made in Greek mythology and Greek folklore where many of the mainland Greeks and the Greek islanders fully understood from their own stories and accounts of Hyperborea that they weren't seen as Hellenic Greeks, they weren't seen as Mediterranean residents, they were seen as very remote, quite aloof, quite enigmatic, these Nordic Hyperboreans that lived in this vast landmass in somewhere in the Arctic North Polar region, these Nordic Hyperboreans who had this very austere civilization using crystallic based occult technology. They had these vast golden temples, they had beautiful houses, residence palaces, and they lived very serene lives in the eternal spring, and very different than the lifestyles of the Hellenic Greeks, these mainland Greeks or Greek islanders, as well as all the other different nations that existed in the Mediterranean basin across southern Europe and obviously into the Levant of Western Asia.
Mm,
So very different in terms of climate, in terms of temperatures, in terms of ecosystems, in terms of topography and landscapes. It was seen as a wonderful and highly elusive northern realm in the
mm.
Arctic North Polar region that was unreachable, unattainable, a place where there was no warfare, there was no suffering, where the Nordic Hyperboreans lived extremely long lives and looked very youthful, even into old age.
Yeah.
So that
Well,
itself is very interesting. And this priest king trinity, also known as the three priest kings, literally were ultimately controlled by the solar deity from Greek mythology and Greek folklore, obviously Apollo Olympos. So there's a lot of interesting connections there. And a lot of it's obviously given archetypal symbolism, but there's much deeper meanings behind the civilization and the spirituality of Hyperborea than just coming from the stories of Greek mythology and Greek folklore.
Well, that's what I kind of understand with all the information that's sort of, I wouldn't say erased, but it's almost dismissed. You realize that there's always a strong spiritual connection. It's a culture that, lived by a Christ consciousness or by a higher form of frequency, that you understand that these kind of cultures seem to have just been decimated over time, throughout the planet, all different types.
You're absolutely correct, and I
Mm,
think we have to look at this landmass of Hyperborea to really discern how magical, how incredible
mm.
this civilization was that existed in the Arctic North Polar region, beyond the Riparian Mountains or the Riphaean Mountains, which are known today as the Polar Urals and the Northern Urals of North Central Russia. So these divine kings were described as the Levkoi Gigantes. These are the white giants that were the rulers under the solar deity Apollo Olympus.
Wow.
They were also defined as the Boreadae, which means the Wind Brothers. And these individuals obviously were the sons of the Greek deity, the North Wind deity we've just mentioned, Boreas Olympus.
Man.
So the interrelationship between Boreas Olympus and Apollo Olympus isn't ever really clarified in Greek mythology and Greek, folklore. What we know is that Apollo Olympus is seen as, shall we say, one of the supreme deities,
Mm.
just as Zeus Olympus, the father of the 12 Olympians from Greek mythology and Greek folklore, has always been
So he was
said.
kind of like the king of the northern land, if you like. That's
Yeah,
kind of, yeah. I mean,
the
we'll never
Northern
know for
Solar
sure.
King, the Northern Solar Prince, the Northern Solar
Mm.
Deity. He was given great, he was exemplified, he was adulated, he was revered, as a connection between mainland Greece, and the Hellenic individuals, the residents that lived there, and this very remote location, the Arctic North Polar region, a vast distance away that almost every single Greek citizen would never visit, would
No.
never ever have the chance to travel to. It would be impossible because, as you know from the stories of Hyperborea, it was unreachable through the
Mm.
polar Urals and the northern Urals, which are obviously today in the Yamalo-Nenets Autonomous Okrug of north central Russia. They were so inaccessible to get to, and obviously the myths also and stories discuss these golden griffins that guarded the royal treasure of the divine priesthood, the actual Boreadae, the Wind Brothers of Boreas Olympus. So these griffins, these beautiful, elegant looking, very regal looking emblems of Hyperborea, guarded fiercely and stoically guarded the royal treasures of the Hyperborean kings.
So you had Hyperborea, and then obviously you had a certain catalysm event that happened, and then
Yeah.
these would have migrated into Scythia. This is, where I believe we've spoken about, and you believe that this is where
Yeah, there
Scythia.
was a disintegration of the civilization of Hyperborea in the Arctic
Mm.
North Polar region. There was migrations coming back from there into northern Russia, and these became the Hyperborean kingdoms. So
Yeah.
they were much like almost like sort of Nordic fiefdoms. They weren't anywhere as extensive or potent or powerful. There had been an initial loss of the occult technologies,
Yeah.
and what replaced it was these more provincial Hyperborean kingdoms scattered across, what is known today as the Kola Peninsula of the Murmansk Oblast of northwestern Russia. Obviously, the Polar Urals and the Northern Urals. There were various outcrop settlements there that could be defined as Hyperborean kingdoms in the Yamalo-Nenets Autonomous Okrug of north central Russia, and going right the way across the Kamchatka Peninsula and the Russian far east of Siberia, northeastern Russia. There were also settlements that had originally been these Hyperborean kingdoms.
I find it
But then
interesting
eventually
how.
they faced demise as well. And out of the collapse of the remnants of those Hyperborean kingdoms arose the civilization of the Scythian Aryans.
And I find it interesting now, today, we still have flags that contain the griffin in them. And
That's correct.
this would be, do you think that these would be remnants of
The the
Hyperborea
the the,
almost?
the griffin is a very powerful archetypal symbol.
Mm,
It represents divine regalism. It represents obviously therefore divine kingship, but it's not just something that is seen in Greek mythology and Greek myth, obviously connected to Hyperborea. Obviously, the dual flags of Great Tataria, one which has a griffin on, the other has an owl on it, but
mm,
also in much connection to Persian mythology, which is obviously the Islamic
yeah.
Republic of Iran today in Central Asia.
Mm,
Their history, before the arising of that religion, to do with Zoroastrianism and Manichaeism, the griffin was seen as a very unique archetypal symbol.
I
So
didn't
I'll
know that.
put this
That's
question out.
fascinating.
Yeah,
That's
I can put this question out there. And again, it's just a posited question. Was the Golden Griffins some type of highly intelligent, highly advanced, airborne grouping of mammals that existed,
mm,
probably going back to the Upper Paleolithic, that were connected to Hyperborea in the Arctic North Polar region, also many of the different countries today that we see in Central Asia, as
mm.
well as perhaps parts of southern Russia. And they had existed as real life forms on this planet. And for whatever reason, they no longer exist.
Some
I don't know.
greedy person wanted that gold and decided, well, we
Or
could wipe
people.
out these griffins and take all the gold. Who knows? Who knows? They're just
Well,
an
they
idea.
were they were classed as extremely fearsome
Mm,
airborne guardians of the royal treasure of the Hyperborean kings. You also have to remember that, we just mentioned the Boreadae, the Wind Brothers themselves were described as being
they're
white
the,
giants. And
yes,
obviously there's
they're
this talk of
Cyclopean giants, weren't
the Cyclopean giants, the Hyperborean giants that existed
they? Mm.
around the lower altitudes of the polar Urals and the northern Urals of north central Russia.
Just imagine that. I'm seeing the picture of it all now. Oh my God. Walking through a valley, seeing griffins flying above you, and then one-eyed giants walking past you.
Well, we've got to remember also from all the thousands of woodcuts, much of which isn't looked at again by the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., or by Stanford University or Harvard University, certainly not by Oxford University or Cambridge University here in the United Kingdom of Great Britain or anywhere else, is these woodcuts that show from Great Tataria, male and female, very, very, very tall white giants that probably anything upward of 10 to 12 feet in height, all of which are interacting with what look like these Tatarians, Nordic, Aryans, or whatever kind of individuals they were, some of which were Turkic.
Mm,
And there's this there's this very peaceful looking interaction between them. There's a co-collaborative process there
mm,
that took place in the development of the civilization of Great Tataria, which was a multicultural civilization, obviously that arose out of the remnants of the civilization the Scythian Aryans had created.
yeah.
Obviously, in their civilization had arisen out of the collapse of the Hyperborean kingdoms, as we've just been discussing.
Yes.
So it's interesting that in Greek mythology and Greek folklore, they talk about these white giants or Hyperborean giants, and a minority of these white giants were classed as Cyclopean giants, the
Mm,
single-eyed giants of the polar Urals and northern Urals and north central Russia. And obviously, you had the golden griffins. They were the royal guardians of the not just the enormous white mountain within the Riparian Mountains or Riphaean Mountains, or the gusty mountains or windy mountains, this vast, impassable expanse at high altitude that nobody could have any chance of getting past to reach the remotest location in the faraway north, which was the civilization and landmass of Hyperborea that shimmered and glowed with such resplendence in the Arctic North Polar region. Really, I find all of
total
that
magic,
information
totally magical.
fascinating.
It is, and it is fascinating. And bringing it today, obviously, the spreading of bringing up to date, and why Tartaria has almost disappeared as a in our historic records. This kind of figures it makes sense because obviously Hyperborea was mythology, and then Great Tartaria comes along. They couldn't have that on the maps. They couldn't have that
No, because it
documented
would connect back and
it will connect back to Hyperborea and Great Scythia. And actually, you'll start realizing that these civilizations used this frequency, which
that's
we
right.
all have to find out what this is. We have to. This is the only way forward for humanity, right? As you
Absolutely.
know, in a
Yes.
positive way. Anyway, we could go forth as we are, but this
Yes.
doesn't look like it's gonna go anywhere great. But yeah, it's Hyperborea, absolutely magical. But is there any connections of Hyperborea to the Bible? I've never looked at that side of things. I mean, is there?
Not exactly, but there is connections, obviously, to Irish mythology,
Hmm.
Irish folklore, also to, Welsh mythology, Welsh folklore in this part of planet Earth, definitely. And also, we've got to look at also Norse mythology from Scandinavia. If you
Yeah.
look at
What? Yeah. I'm not really. Yeah.
you look at the actual individual Odin Asir, his son Thor Asir from Norse mythology. You look at the Ashgard, which basically translates to deity homeland or deity landmass, or it represents the abode of the Norse deities.
Right.
Basically, so could we argue the point and posit the idea that Ashgard was really referring to some part of the landmass of Hyperborea in the Arctic North Polar region?
Well, Asgard as well. I mean, obviously, you know where that comes from. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. You have that in
That's
that
right.
story. So that's kind of incredible, right?
But that in itself has become an archetypal symbol, and there are a lot of connections between Celtic mythology, Celtic folklore, Norse mythology, Norse
Mm,
folklore, and also a lot of those are comparative to Slavic mythology, Slavic folklore, especially from northern Russia, and also much of the information that's come from the Sami or the Laplanders of northeastern Finland. That area, Fennoscania, going right the way across into the Kola Peninsula and a Murmansk of northwestern Russia. But a lot of it's just ignored. Anthropologists aren't interested. It's not seen as relevant to really analyze in a critical and objective and really a logical way the fact that so many different cultures, so many different individuals from so many different expanses and geographic locations across, the northern latitudes of planet Earth have
yeah,
all these stories, these accounts of the faraway north, of
yeah.
some vast shimmering, crystal kingdom that
Mm,
once existed there, this golden paradise where you had, you know, silver poplar trees that's literally wheat amber droplets onto the
mm,
riverbanks. Just things like that. The idea of the Lefkoi gigantus, these white giants that were the Boreadi, the Wind Brothers, who were
mm.
the sons of, Boreas Olympos, the North Wind deity, who seemingly, you know, took instructions or allowed, the solar deity Apollo Olympos to supersede his, jurisdictional control over Hyperborea on an intermittent basis, which is also very interesting.
So do you think with the Kola Peninsula where these pyramids have been found, do you think, or well, not exactly found, but they've been
All the names
identical?
of pyramids, yeah.
Yeah, they kind of look like. But do you think they were connected to Hyperborea? These pyramids?
Yes, I do. The we know from the fantastic efforts and the researches of many credible Russian archaeologists, what they have found in some of the most remote locations in the Kola Peninsula, the Murmansk is the remnants of vast granite pyramids that have been defined as both Hyperborean pyramids and Russian pyramids. We also know that there has possibly been even more findings in parts of the polar Urals and the northern Urals of the Yamal-Nenets Autonomous Okrug of north central Russia. So we believe that these granite pyramids, various sizes, the remnants have been found there. And again, there's also researches that have been done into the Kamchatka Peninsula, where it's believed there are remnant granite pyramids that some individuals have named as Hyperborean pyramids or Russian pyramids. So, was that part of some kind of Hyperborean pyramid network that
Mm,
was used to draw down vast quantities of telluric electricity for powering their civilization, for anti-gravity purposes, for construction purposes, for healing purposes. Again, I'm just putting the information out there. It's just a question. There's not a vast amount of information on the landmass of Hyperborea.
No, there isn't.
There's
It's very
equivalent.
scarce.
Yeah, we know there's a lot of obviously stories about the faraway north and these crystal kingdoms, these northern kingdoms that once existed, that are listed in various stories from Turkic mythology and Turkic folklore from Central Asia and parts of southern Russia. So that's interesting to note as well. So that if you do the researches yourself and actually make the effort, you find there are comparative stories that include obviously the white giants that sometimes are called these Hyperborean giants, and a minority amongst them were the Cyclopses or Cyclopean giants. That's definitely there. We know that there's obviously connections to the remnants of these granite pyramids across the whole expanse that they've been seen in these specific locations in northern Russia. Does that mean that in parts of the Arctic North Polar region, or maybe parts of the Arctic continent, buried under thousands of tons of snow and ice, are there the remains of Arctic pyramids that come from Hyperborea? Again, just putting that out there as a question.
And it's good to put it out there because we have to look at this objectively, this information and what we've been presented with, because it's very limited to what we actually find nowadays. And I do think, obviously, time and money and all these things, but why are these things not looked into enough? And why is, well, we do know, me and Stephen obviously know the bigger answers, but we won't go on to that when we talk about all these subjects because we're very aware of how we have to convey this in a way that is done logically and not far out. But there are many reasons why that information isn't presented to us.
We know that from the stories of Greek mythology and Greek folklore that there was an individual who can be defined as a Hyperborean druid and ceremonial magician and expert polymath that had actually traveled from the landmass of Hyperborea beyond the Riparian Mountains or Riphaean Mountains, of north central Russia down into mainland Greece. This individual's name was Abaros Southisou, and he was given a magic arrow by the Greek deity known as Apollos Olympos.
Wow.
And apparently he flew around planet Earth on this magic arrow given to him by the Greek deity, the solar deity known as Apollo Olympos. And this Hyperborean druid and ceremonial magician who was an expert polymath known as Abaros Southisou was performing miracles apparently at the time, going back presumably to the upper Paleolithic, on planet Earth for thousands of Homo sapiens or human beings to alleviate their sufferings and concerns and ailments and sicknesses and making their lives a lot easier. So I'll put that out. Was the magic arrow, was that some kind of spacecraft? Again, I'm just putting it out there. We're saying we're looking at this in terms of archetypal symbolism, yeah?
Can they come back? Can they come back and do that again? That might be it's a good time to do it now.
Pretty amazing. Magic arrows from the landmass of Hyperborea in the Arctic North Polar region, with Hyperborean druids on them would be quite a profound thing to see.
A lot
over
of
planet Earth.
And a lot of, so the druids that we've looked into a lot, and I know obviously you've looked into it a huge amount, but there was a lot of druids in northern Russia at some stage, and that was only up to 200 years ago, wasn't it? I mean, there was quite a few druids still in that area, right?
In the remoter parts of the Siberian taiga and the Kamchatka Peninsula of the Russian Far Eastern Siberia, yes, I think that's kind of the vast expanse, very remote and not very shall we say, populated, which is northeastern Russia. Yeah, there was very small communities of, Slavic druids or Russian druids.
And Santa, just to say on that note, Santa Claus was actually the exact history of it. I'm still looking into it, but he he was a shaman, and
Yeah, that's
obviously
correct.
a northern, Santa Claus was a shaman, so they verted it into being
Yeah,
this guy.
that's totally correct. He was Santa Claus or Santa Claus,
That's right.
as many people pronounce his name,
Mm,
was really based on the Sami shaman or the Laplander shaman
that's
of
right.
northeastern Finland,
Mm,
and the which is obviously part of the much larger expanse of Fennoscania. But Fennoscania, in terms of its historical perspectives, really is connected in many ways to northern Russia as well as the Arctic North Polar region. There's a lot of connections there. So we could say, again, this is just a speculative question, were these Slavic druids or Russian druids, were they remnants of the civilization of Hyperborea or the Hyperborean kingdoms that had isolated themselves for many aeons of time, maybe going back, really going back before the time of the civilization of the Scythian Aryans,
mm.
and had managed to isolate themselves off from other individuals. Again, we have no way of really knowing, but it's very interesting to kind of give it consideration.
But the Hyperborea, do you think they, when their civilization fell and they obviously moved and migrated around, do you think they went round to Ireland, right? So they actually got round to this part, and this is so. What's that? And the giants? Do you think they travelled over that side of the
Well,
world?
there's definitely connections between the landmass of Ireland in terms of its Irish Druidism. We know that for a fact because in the Irish Gaelic language, the actual landmass of Hyperborea was basically known as Thule. And although this is known in the Greek language, the actual word Thule, how it is spelt, it means northern place or north place.
Yeah.
But actually, the actual root etymology of Thule comes from Thua, Thula, Thule, and many other variations, such as Thuil, which actually translates directly in the Irish Gaelic language as North Place.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
there was a lot of connections between the Irish Celts, the Irish Druids, and this remotest far away north, where the landmass of Hyperborea, which they referred to as Thule or Thule, and many other linguistic variations existed. So I do believe that there was connections. They more than likely did sail up into the
Makes sense.
Norwegian Sea and up into the Arctic Ocean. I
Mm.
do believe those connections existed historically.
Yeah, yeah, I know. I feel them too. I mean, when you look into the subjects and the locations and how things moved around civilizations, does make a lot of sense. Amazing talk, amazing information, but just relaying it. So there were some Greek philosophers that kind of stated about Hyperborea. So we're going to end it on that for now. But just tell the audience about that.
I'll just say briefly, there was a numerous, whether they were Greek scholars, Greek polymaths, or and so on, or even Roman scholars, Roman polymaths. Many individuals over many aeons gave wondrous quotes about the civilization of Hyperborea. So one of these individuals is the exemplary Greek scholar known as Callimachos Batadeos. Now he wrote about Hyperborea. I won't go into the actual Pacific reference. I'll just give you the quote. He stated, "They, the Hyperboreans, send offerings to Apollon at Delos from the Riphaean mountains." Now, I mean, you can go and do that research yourself. If people want, I can give the exact reference if they want it. It's fragment 215 from the Scholiast on Apollonius Rhodius 4.284.
Mm, cool.
Okay. And the second individual that I would like to quote is the Greek historian that many people may well be familiar with. He's very well known, was Diodorus Capatios. Some people know him as Diodorus Siculus and Diodorus of Sicily. Now, he actually is quoted as saying, "We are informed that the Hyperboreans also have a language which is peculiar to them. They are most friendly disposed towards the Greeks, and especially towards the Athenians and the Delians, who have inherited this goodwill from most ancient times. The myth also relates that certain Greeks visited the Hyperboreans and left behind them their costly votive offerings bearing inscriptions in Greek letters." And this part of the quote's interesting. It goes into talking about the Hyperborean druid that we've just been discussing. In the same way, Abaros, a Hyperborean, came to Greece in ancient times and renewed the goodwill and kingship of his people to the Delians. Now, the Pacific reference there, if people want it, I mean, I don't have to give it, but I
No,
can.
go
It's
on. People like
very clear.
references.
Okay, so this specific quote from Diodorus Capatios, also known as Diodorus Siculus or Diodorus of Sicily, is from the Library of History, Book 2, and that's 47.4. So that's the Library of History, Book 2, 47.4.
Brilliant, Stephen. Amazing. And understand, everybody, that was Stephen referenced then, but understand that you can't reference every time you say something about an information. You'd
It's
be
just
quite
very,
bored,
yeah, it
actually. You'd
slows
actually
everything
switch.
down.
Understand that the information is sitting right in front of you. You just search and find this information. It's all out there. It's not hidden, but you do have to search for it and research. And Stephen is particularly incredibly good at finding research and information, and he has a particular way of fine-tuning this as well. So, Steve, absolutely incredible as always, and blown away, and amazing stuff. And Hyperborea is absolutely, I mean, amazing
Fascinating
place.
subject.
It
I mean,
really is. We didn't even get onto the swans, but the swans of Hyperborea and all
yeah,
this, the beauty of the animal kingdom and
yeah.
their natural world that lived around them, and that's
But all the
something that.
flora and fauna of Hyperborea was described as being much larger.
Mm,
So the white swans of Hyperborea were described as being enormous.
yeah.
And that's interesting to note, in terms of in the faraway north, certain types of electromagnetic conditions to do with the ether or the atmosphere,
Mm.
perhaps, again, I'm just putting out an idea concept. Hyperborea being in the Arctic North Polar region would have been very close to the entrance into the Hollow Earth in
Yeah.
that area. So were certain types of electromagnetic frequencies or vibrations helping to encourage much larger growth of the flora and fauna? Again, it's just a question I'm putting out there.
And it's a good question to put out there. I
Yeah,
feel that this isn't some airy fairy utopia world that that existed in some dreamland in the reality of humans. This was a reality, and the reality I can always say this, but I do. The reality we have today is so far away from that it's very difficult to even comprehend the peace and tranquility. I mean, imagine living amongst that natural world and animals communing with each other in such a beautiful way. That does happen on rare occasions in the Western world, where you have wild animals, talking with humans and communing with humans. But the beauty of this world and the natural world is all around us that we've kind of lost so much touch of, and we're
mm,
getting more, I feel, more disconnected from it day by day because we ignore this incredible history that we've had on this planet. And Stephen, thank you.
that's
Thank you
right.
for all your knowledge, and you're so inspiring to I'm so grateful that you're in my
I'm just
life.
really happy that we can, put this information out there in the Sacred Wisdom podcast. I know the viewers are fascinated by it and it interests us as well, and it's really important that such information is actually put out there for consideration.
And I enjoy it because we've always inspired each other with
That's
with
right.
talking,
Absolutely.
and it's fantastic to put this information out there and inspire others, and just
Yeah.
say we might not be right, but this is our perspective. This is the way we see what's happened, and there's nothing
We're just putting
wrong.
information out there. That's what we're doing.
Exactly. And it's good to do that. And everyone has to do that. So if you're anyone watching, if you have opinions, put them out on the internet. Say what you want to say, put them out in videos and talk about it. Talk with people and get people, into communities and actually
That's
speaking
right.
about this. It's
It's very
really important.
positive. Yeah. And it is
But you're
important.
sorry, so Steve, just say everybody's always welcome here.
That's right.
So you're all welcome here, and it's great that we're all here together. So it's wonderful.
Mm,
But
exactly.
sorry, Steve, I interrupted you.
No, that's all right. I'll just say that it's important for human consciousness to question the seemingly solidified, highly tangible, the contours of this very condensed looking 3D holographic reality we call the material dimension, and actually realize that much of what we're told in Western science should be readdressed, should be looked at again. There's too many unanswered questions. I do believe that that civilization existed. I think that the Greek mythology and Greek folklore, when it comes to Hyperborea, is highly valid. There's so many stories from Turkic mythology and Turkic folklore in Central Asia and Southern Russia
Mm.
that talk about these white giants that exist
All there.
in the polar Urals and the northern Urals of the Yamal-Nenets Autonomous Okrug of North Central Russia, and all of that is ignored. There's so many connections. If you look at it in a comparative sense, the different types of world mythology, world folklore, we've made those connections in numerous previous Sacred Wisdom podcasts. The white giants, or these Tatarian giants, and how they are probably the genetic inheritors of much of the occult technology that had arisen out of the civilization and landmass of Hyperborea, where we see, these Lefkoi gigantes, the white giants of Hyperborea, existed. The three sons, the Boreadae, the wind brothers of Boreas Olympos, who was the north wind deity. So there's a lot of connections.
It's all, all the stories are there. We have the folklore, the information is there. It's how we interpret it and how we address it.
That's right.
What I think people need to understand is that, like, where we are today in society is over a huge span of time, a period of time that we've had these things happen. So lies and corruption and certain events. And we've got to this point now where really society is in a really bad place. Really appreciate all my time I spend with you, and us talking. It just
I appreciate we've got the time to put all this information out. We make that effort. I think it's really important.
And it all started from when we started writing the book, Mysterious Realities. Which is actually available on Amazon in paperback and ebook. You can also purchase on my website. But yeah, we started writing the book, and then we've kind of evolved into these podcasts and just kept going, haven't we?
Yeah.
I mean, it's quite incredible. So
it really is. Yes.
But anyway, for now, it's goodbye for me.
And it's goodbye for me.